Welcome to the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast, where timeless biblical truths meet modern leadership. We are thrilled to have you join us on this journey of exploring how biblical principles can guide us in leading with wisdom, integrity, and purpose. Whether you're leading in the church, your workplace, or your community, this podcast is designed to inspire, challenge, and equip you for the road ahead. Let's dive into today's conversation and discover how Scripture shapes the way we lead.
Welcome back to Biblical Perspectives for Leadership.
Glad to be here.
So, I want you to imagine surviving the worst crisis of your life.
Yeah.
Like maybe it was a literal rescue from a burning building or, something more common.
Right, like pulling your business back from the absolute brink of bankruptcy.
Exactly. Or finally escaping a deeply toxic work environment. And you make it out, you smell the metaphorical smoke on your clothes, you take a deep breath, and that natural human instinct just kicks in.
Oh yeah, the relief.
Yeah, you think, I survived, I am free, now I can finally kick back and do whatever I want. But what if the exact moment you are rescued is actually the exact moment your strictest obligations begin?
It is a massive psychological pivot, for sure.
It really is. So today, we are diving into the material covering the Israelites' exit from Egypt, and we're exploring it as a profound study on leadership principles, but also just everyday life. The whole mission of this deep dive is to look at a pretty counterintuitive reality found in the story.
And that reality is that true deliverance demands immediate obedience. To set the context of this material, Israel has just survived an unparalleled crisis. The Passover has happened, Pharaoh has finally yielded after the final plague, and God has forcefully brought them out of Egypt. I mean, the chains are off.
They're free.
They are free, but God does not allow their newfound freedom to just, devolve into aimless wandering. He doesn't open the door and say, all right, you're out, go find yourselves.
Yeah, good luck out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Immediately, within hours of their escape, he enforces structure, he mandates memory, he demands worship, and assigns some really heavy responsibility.
And I think that that's exactly where the friction is for anyone listening to this. Whether you are leading a corporate team through a merger, or maybe managing your family through a rough patch, or honestly just trying to get your own everyday life on track.
There was a gap there.
A massive gap, right, between escaping a crisis and actually building a sustainable future.
Yeah.
Like, we want the rescue, but we usually deeply resent the structure that comes after it.
We do, and while that resentment usually stems from a basic misunderstanding of what freedom actually is. And that really brings us to the first core principle of leadership we see in this story, which is the absolute necessity of identity and responsibility.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
So before a leader can implement strategies or, write a vision statement, they have to answer a foundational question. Who do you belong to, and what does that rescue cost you?
Right.
We see this starkly addressed in Exodus chapter 13, verse 1 through 2. This is where God commands Moses to consecrate or set apart all the firstborn among the children of Israel.
Right. The text specifies every firstborn male, both human and animal. But let me push back on this a bit.
Sure.
I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of an Israelite who just walked out of slavery. I'm exhausted. And the very first thing I hear isn't, hey, take a month off to heal.
No, not at all.
It's a demand for my most valuable asset, my firstborn. For a modern leader, it feels like getting bailed out by an investor, only for them to immediately turn around and demand 51% of your voting shares.
Yeah.
Why does God initiate freedom with such a heavy claim?
Because an unclaimed life inevitably enslaves itself again.
Wow.
God is establishing a mechanism of ownership here. The firstborn of Israel only survived that final plague because God provided the Passover protocol. So by commanding the consecration of the firstborn, God is establishing this foundational principle, which is what God saves, God claims.
What God saves, God claims.
Exactly. It prevents gratitude from decaying into entitlement. If a leader believes they survived a crisis just through their own brilliance, they become arrogant.
Oh, absolutely.
But if they recognize they were spared by grace, they become stewards.
So it's like the bailout doesn't mean you answer to no one. It actually means you now answer exclusively to the one who saved you.
Precisely. And this is fundamentally about relationship. It's not just taxation. Giving God the firstborn meant giving him the absolute priority. In an agricultural society, the firstborn animal or the first crop, that was your security for the future.
That was your 401k.
Exactly. God was asking them to hand over their security blanket. He wants the first fruits of a leader's energy, their time, and their trust, not, the leftovers once they finally feel comfortable.
Which perfectly transitions us to the next trap in this story. Because once a leader accepts that responsibility, once they decide to dedicate their best efforts, the immediate threat isn't necessarily a new external enemy.
No, it's internal.
Right, it's internal amnesia. We forget. Life gets busy, the adrenaline of the rescue wears off, and we just lose focus. So how do we protect this new identity?
By meticulously guarding the culture of your environment, memory isn't just something you passively have. In leadership, memory is something you have to actively cultivate.
And we see that directly in the text, right? In Exodus chapter 13, verse 3 through 4, Moses gives this direct command to actively remember the day they came out of Egypt.
Yes, but notice how that memory is immediately paired with a physical environmental purge.
Right, the bread.
Exactly. In Exodus chapter 13, verse 6 through 7, God commands the complete removal of all leavened bread from their borders.
I actually really want to dig into the mechanics of that leaven imagery because I think it's brilliant.
It is very specific.
Yeah, because leaven, or yeast, is essentially a fermentation agent. It makes dough rise. If we look at how yeast actually works, it's like dropping a single drop of concentrated dye into a glass of still water.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You don't even have to stir it. Why?
Uh,
Because the water molecules are in this constant microscopic motion, and they transfer that dye through passive diffusion until the entire glass just changes color.
It spreads on its own.
Exactly. And in a company culture or a family dynamic, toxicity operates the exact same way.
That's the level.
Unchecked pride, a little bit of office gossip, lingering bitterness. You don't have to actively hold a meeting to teach people how to be bitter. Human beings passively mirror the anxiety or the compromises of their environment. It just diffuses into the cultural water supply.
And that passive diffusion is exactly why the command here is so severe. God doesn't say, hey, just try to keep the leaven contained to the kitchen.
Right, put it into Tupperware.
No, he says to remove it entirely from your borders. Leaven represented the old system, the mindset of Egypt. You cannot step fully into a new promise if you are still preserving the habits of your captivity.
Wow.
The psychological insight here from the material is that sometimes the most powerful move a leader can make is subtraction. We are always obsessed with addition.
Always.
Here.
Adding a new morning routine, downloading a new productivity app.
Creating a whole new department. But true obedience often begins by letting go of the coping mechanisms that maybe helped you survive your dysfunction, but will absolutely kill your future.
Subtraction is a leadership strategy. I really like that. You actively remove the leaven to protect the purity of the culture.
Yes.
But here's where the story introduces a complication that honestly feels entirely counterintuitive to me.
How so?
Well, it makes sense to be strictly obedient when you're trying to purge toxic habits. Like, you need discipline in the desert. But what happens when the desert ends? The story reveals that the ultimate leadership test isn't surviving the wilderness. It's actually surviving success.
Oh, the success syndrome. It is one of the most perilous traps in human psychology, and we see God preemptively address this in Exodus chapter 13, verse 5.
What does he say?
He explicitly tells Israel that they must continue to keep this strict observance, these exact same rules, when he brings them into the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey.
Wait, but isn't the whole point of getting to the land of milk and honey to finally relax? Like, to stop eating the unleavened bread of affliction and start enjoying the feast? Why carry the strictness of the desert into the paradise of the promise?
Because human neurology adapts incredibly quickly to comfort.
That's true.
When you are starving in the desert, every single drop of water feels like a miracle that demands gratitude. But when you have a flowing river of milk and honey in your backyard, the miracle just becomes your new baseline.
You take it for granted.
Completely. Comfort breeds complacency, and complacency breeds self-reliance. God knows that blessing and abundance will actually test a leader's obedience far more strictly than hardship ever does.
Because in Egypt, they needed God desperately just to survive the physical day.
Exactly. But in Canaan, surrounded by wealth, the illusion of independence is incredibly strong.
It really forces anyone listening to look in the mirror and ask a really uncomfortable question. Are you faithful when you are desperate but forgetful when your bank account is full?
That's the real test.
Right. Like, do you pray meticulously when the quarterly numbers are crashing, but then wander into arrogance when the team is hitting all their KPIs?
It's the danger of treating God, or even just your core values, as a life raft instead of a compass. You only use a life raft when the ship is sinking. Once you're on dry land, you abandon it.
Wow.
But God is warning them here, do not let the blessing cause you to abandon the one who blessed you. The rigid structure of obedience isn't meant to punish them in the promised land. It's meant to tether them to reality so the promised land doesn't destroy them.
Okay, so if a leader actually manages to navigate both of those extremes, if they survive the desperate crisis of Egypt and they survive the intoxicating comfort of Canaan without losing their discipline, the material suggests there's yet another hurdle.
There always is.
The next stage of leadership isn't just maintaining your own discipline, it's the problem of legacy. How do you transfer a culture of obedience to a generation that didn't experience the crisis firsthand?
And that is the crucial pivot from personal leadership to generational leadership. You can't just mandate obedience, you have to explain its origins.
And we see this mandate clearly in Exodus chapter 13, verse 8 through 10, right?
Yeah.
And then it's reinforced again in Exodus chapter 13, verse 14 through 15. The text focuses heavily on the moment a child asks, "What is this?"
Yes.
Moses is commanding the parents to be ready to, quote, "show thy son in that day," and articulate the exact reason for these strange practices.
Let's talk about that question, what is this? Because in modern leadership, questions from subordinates or from children often trigger defensiveness.
Oh, big time. I mean, if you've been working at a company for 10 years and a 22-year-old Gen Z new hire comes in and starts questioning the workflow, asking, why do we use this outdated software? Why do we have these specific boundaries?
He's irritated.
The natural tired leader's instinct is to just snap back and say, because I said so, or because that is company policy. But this text totally reframes that dynamic.
Yeah.
It's essentially saying that if you answer, because I said so, you have failed as a leader.
You failed because you are handing them a tradition without a testimony.
All right.
If you enforce a method without explaining the message behind it, the practice just becomes an empty shell. I mean, the child or the new hire is observing the strict removal of leaven or the sacrifice of an animal, and to them, it just looks bizarre and restrictive.
They didn't feel the whip of the slave master.
Yeah.
They didn't see the Red Sea part.
Exactly. To them, these rules just look like a massive inconvenience.
So when they ask why, it isn't an act of rebellion, it's a demand for context.
It is an open door for discipleship. God is telling the Israelites, do not be annoyed by the curiosity of the next generation. Use it.
Leverage it.
Yes. When they ask why you are doing this, you tell them the story of what God did for you in Egypt. You tell them about the rescue. Faith has to be personalized.
That makes so much sense.
If you want your team to prioritize integrity over quick profits, or if you want your children to understand why you prioritize worship, you have to model it visibly and explain the why constantly.
Which brings up the most physical, visible aspect of this entire deep dive. We've explored the internal memory, the psychology of success, the verbal legacy, but how does this actually translate into what a leader physically does on a random Tuesday morning?
What does it look like?
Right. What is the tangible cost of this lifestyle?
Well, the material does not leave this in the realm of theory. It provides vivid physical markers. Look at Exodus chapter 13, verse 9, and again in verse 16. God declares that this observance must be a sign upon their hand and a memorial or frontlets between their eyes.
The hand and the eyes. Why those two specific parts of the body?
It is the intersection of perspective and action. The eyes represent focus. How do you view the world? Are you looking at your business, your family, or your community through the lens of fear and cultural pressure, or are your eyes filtered through the lens of God's word?
Okay, that's the memorial between your eyes.
Exactly. And the hand represents your output, your work, your transactions, how you serve, how you discipline. God is demanding that obedience physically alter how a leader behaves. But to grasp the ultimate gravity of this, we have to look at the cost of redemption detailed in Exodus chapter 13, verse 11 through 13.
This is the instruction regarding the donkey. And I have to admit, when I read this in the story, it stopped me in my tracks.
It's intense.
It is. God is repeating the command about the firstborn, but then there is this highly specific, very disturbing instruction. The firstborn donkey had to be redeemed with a substitute, a lamb.
Right.
And if you didn't redeem it with a lamb, its neck was to be broken. Let's just pause here. Breaking an animal's neck is an incredibly harsh, violent image.
Yes, it is.
For a modern leader sitting in a boardroom or a parent managing a household, how do we translate this ancient, bloody standard of sacrifice into an everyday context without losing the plot? Like, why is the language so extreme?
The language is extreme because grace is extreme. See, the donkey was an unclean animal under the law. It was a beast of burden, essential for commerce and labor, but completely unacceptable for a holy offering. It represents the unredeemed human state, stubborn, bound to labor, and ultimately unacceptable without intervention.
Right.
The law was absolute. The unclean thing cannot simply be ignored or grandfathered in. It must be judged, which is the breaking of the neck, or it must be redeemed by a substitute. The lamb had to die so the donkey could live.
So the lamb takes the hit. It absorbs the judgment.
It is the ultimate principle of substitutionary atonement. Every single time an Israelite leader looked at their working donkey pulling a cart, they knew that a lamb had bled so that donkey could live. It was a visceral, inescapable reminder that life is preserved through sacrifice. It forces the leader to remember the Passover night in Egypt, where the blood on the doorposts spared their own children.
It's all connected.
It is. And from a broader biblical perspective, it points directly forward to the ultimate Lamb of God, Jesus Christ, stepping in to absorb the judgment we deserved.
It really strips away any illusion that salvation is cheap. We love to talk about grace being a free gift, but this text reminds us that just because something is free to the recipient, it doesn't mean it wasn't unimaginably costly to the giver.
And that realization is what fuels sustainable obedience. You don't put the token on your hand or the memorial between your eyes to earn God's favor. You do it because you are deeply aware of what it costs to buy your freedom.
Right.
When a leader truly grasps the cost of their redemption, obedience stops feeling like a heavy burden and it just becomes the only logical, grateful response.
That is a phenomenal paradigm shift. So just to summarize the core mechanics we've unpacked today for you listening. First, deliverance creates an immediate obligation. What God saves, He absolutely claims. Second, memory is an active defense mechanism against toxic culture. You have to remove the leaven of your past to step into your promise. Third, the success syndrome is real. Comfort can erode your reliance on God far faster than a crisis ever could.
Without a doubt.
Fourth, never dictate a tradition without explaining the testimony behind it. The why is how you build a legacy. And finally, true obedience is visible in our hands and our eyes, deeply anchored in the heavy, beautiful cost of our redemption by a substitute.
It really is a masterful blueprint for sustaining a life after you've been rescued. But, as we close, there is one final layer to this concept of substitution that we really haven't touched on yet, and it's something I want to leave you, the listener, to process.
Okay, let's hear it.
We talked heavily about the lamb sacrificing its life to redeem the donkey, right?
Right.
The clean absorbing the cost for the unclean.
Right.
We naturally position ourselves as the ones who receive that grace. But in the context of leadership, if you are currently enjoying the milk and honey of Canaan, if you have survived your crisis and built a platform of stability, whose lamb are you being right now?
Oh man, that is a heavy question.
It changes the entire dynamic. The story begins with God actively refusing to let Israel's newfound freedom become aimless by instantly providing structure and rules. So I have to ask you, where in your everyday life are you craving freedom, but what you actually need right now is the structure of holy dedication to keep you from wandering? True leadership eventually demands that you become the substitute for someone else's survival. Who are you currently sacrificing your comfort, your time, or your resources for to ensure that they survive their own Egypt?
Wow.
If redemption requires a cost, a true leader doesn't just celebrate the lamb that saved them, they become willing to absorb a cost to save those coming up behind them.
That is a profound challenge to walk away with. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the material. We've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully it changes how you view the tension between the freedom you crave and the structure you actually need. We'll catch you next time.
Keep leading well and always remember the cost of your freedom.
Thank you for joining us on the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast. I hope today's insights have encouraged and equipped you to lead with faith, wisdom, and purpose. Remember, the greatest leader of all time taught us that true leadership is about serving others. If you enjoyed this episode and podcast, be sure to subscribe, share it with others, and leave a review. It helps us reach more people with these transformative truths. Until next time, keep leading with grace and walking in purpose.